It should not be when we are doing.
Okay, so thanks everybody for joining. Welcome to the COP26 in Glasgow. My name is Joe Phelan, and I lead the work of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development in India. And the first thing to say is that I'm not in Glasgow, I'm in Delhi, but through technology, we have convened a group of leaders from civil society and business. Some are in Glasgow, some are dotted across India. And together, they're going to share their perspectives under the theme of the climate leadership India needs. Let me just take a moment to tell you that the World Business Council is made up of more than 200 leading companies who work together to advance and accelerate business action on climate, on nature, and on equity, and to accelerate the sustainable transition of power, transport, health, the built environment, materials, and the food system. And also, crucially, to redefine how business performance is managed, measured, disclosed, and valued. We're hosting this session today with the Confederation of Indian Industry, with whom we've had a partnership, a practical partnership based on collaboration and action for more than 20 years. And in that context, it's my pleasure to introduce my co-host for today from the Confederation of Indian Industry, Deputy Director General Seema Arora.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. And welcome to everybody. A very good morning in Glasgow and a good afternoon in India. We are very pleased as CII to partner with WBCSD for this very interesting session. In fact, the first one today in Glasgow. We have our team from India, the CII, the Confederation of Indian Industry, there in Glasgow, who would be also participating in this session. I just want to say that, you know, it's a privilege to have been working with WBCSD as CII almost for the last 3 decades. Our partnership goes back to Earth Summit, the run-up to Earth Summit. And we have really, I think, grown, matured our partnership. CII, as you all know, large organization, our members are here. Our strength is our members, a lot of convening power, a lot of links with all stakeholders, 9,500 plus members, and you have some of them very senior ones represented here. We work closely with Joe and his team in India to work together on climate and other areas. And we look forward to continuing this association. I'm really looking forward to this session, the climate leadership India needs, and within that, the focus on greening India's power grid. So thank you very much, and pleased to be able to co-host this with WBCSD and Joe. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Seema. So we're holding this event in the Business Pavilion in the blue zone of COP26. And we're grateful to our partners, We Mean Business, who've arranged for businesses to be able to access this pavilion and share their perspectives and ambitions for climate action during this COP through this Business Pavilion. We Mean Business have been important partners to the World Business Council in India and to other business-facing organizations. And in India, they've supported business action in renewables, transport, and science-based targets. And so I'd like to ask now Sophie Punt, the Managing Director for Policy at We Mean Business, to share her perspectives on business action in India and the benefits of collaboration.
Yes. Can you hear me clearly? I hope so.
Very clear.
Very good. Well, welcome everybody from Glasgow. It is incredibly busy. There's 10,000 people ascending to COP right now. And there's a lot of hope, a lot of expectation on all of us. I personally took the climate train 2 days ago from Amsterdam to Glasgow, and I was amongst a lot of what we call XR, which is Extinction Rebellion youth. And I interviewed a lot of them just to get a sense of what they're looking for. And all of them are saying, we cannot deny the climate disaster that's looming on us any longer, and we're in this together. If one of us fails, we all fail. And that's the sense that I was getting. They feel the youth is supporting us, and they ask for support from us to help them. And the same applies to India. And you saw yesterday at the G20 summit that was closed in Rome, there were some very promising results. Most importantly, G20 countries agreed to go net zero by 2050. And that's a major achievement because the G20 countries together represent more than 80% of the global emissions. And they were also talking about stopping the financing of the worst type of coal-fired power plants right away and phasing out coal gradually. Now, of course, we could want to phase out things faster than is perhaps agreed, but what it does mean, we are setting a step in the right direction. Every time these summits happen, expectations are higher and commitments become better. So my hope is that at COP again will make a significant improvement. Now, the G20, India is obviously part of it, and as an emerging economy of its size, is critical for the world to succeed. And what we did as the Women Business Coalition, which is a coalition of World Business Council and 6 other partners around the world, we issued a letter to G20 leaders asking them to stick to the 1.5, keep it alive, and strengthen NDCs and national policies. And this is exactly what we're hoping India will do as well. Also to look at energy, so phasing out coal, but also allowing renewable energy, electrification of transport to succeed. And finally, looking at financing, and as financing 100 billion to developing countries a year must happen in order to retain the credibility of developed countries as well, that they're serious about doing this together and not alone. Plus, that money needs to go increasingly to adaptation, not just mitigation. And the amount of money that's going to adaptation right now is simply too low. That needs to go up. Plus, of course, in addition to giving money, we also need to make sure that money is taken away from the areas where we don't want it to go, such as fossil fuel subsidies. We have 800 companies that have signed this letter, many of them from India. And so we understand that this is going to be a big support from India going forward. What it means then in India is we work with our coalition partners, in particular World Business Council, CDP, Climate Group, and TERI. And then we have another number of affiliated partners, such as the World Resources Institute, where we work together to help develop India as an economy that is sustainable and that reduces emissions. And why I'm saying that in that order is that for many developing countries, it is still so critical to give people access to energy, access to transport, access to products that many developed countries already have, but do it in a sustainable and climate responsible way. So what we're having is target setting, and this is not done with our partner CDP, having companies commit to science-based targets. We work on the sectoral initiatives like renewable energy together with Climate Group and World Business Council. EV 100 is now going to be extended to EV 100 plus. That includes trucks. And importantly, 1 out of 2 trucks in the world is being manufactured in China and India. So trucking is a really, really important part of the puzzle here. And finally, then the industry. And I've got here Mahindra Singh on the left from Dalmia Cement and Rajiv Misra from Apraava Energy on the right. So just to show the support from industry for that. And finally, of course, then is again the financing, making sure that money comes across. We can only do this together. And what we increasingly see in India, that our partners are making MOUs with various states and government agencies to make this happen together. So my hope for the India future and of this session is that we can really see how India can take an increasingly leading role to show how economies can develop sustainably and climate neutral, like leapfrog, similar to how many people there never had landlines and went straight to mobile phones. Let's make sure that these economies develop straight to climate neutral solutions. With initiatives like what we have within the Women Business Coalition, but also linked to the Mission Possible Partnership that's set up with others, focusing very much on decarbonization of industries like cement, steel, chemicals, but also heavy transport of trucking, aviation, shipping. Initiatives like Lead It, where in India and Sweden co-chair this initiative worldwide, again, decarbonizing industry. And so my hope is that this session we can showcase the successes that businesses have achieved in decarbonizing already, combined with their ambition to do much more, and show how we can encourage governments and help governments achieve the aggressive targets that we now need to decarbonize the global economy, including India's. And my final word is then, we are behind governments. We want to help them, not push them. industry is wanting to support governments in making these carbon targets met. And I hope that we can count on India, and as a Women Business Coalition, we are together with Indian business and governments to help make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Joe, since we still don't have Liz, maybe we go ahead with our, okay. Just to say that, you know, Sophie, you put in the context so well. And I would just like to add to it for just a second before I introduce the session. I think the COP is a really good opportunity and a unique opportunity for us to garner much more support. We really want to build on the ambition for enhanced climate action. And that's why CII is there with a strong delegation reflecting the different sectors. We have all the sectors covered in our delegation. We also want to make a point that we need to ensure climate justice and enable a just transition that leaves no one behind. We want to deliver on higher aspirations in the near term. While we focus on the long term, near term is equally important. And we need to consider the cost of transition, while that the cost of transition does not unnecessarily burden the vulnerable communities. Two more important points. I think we need to enhance the focus on non-GHG, non-carbon GHGs. So we have a lot of focus on carbon-based GHGs or carbon dioxide, so to say, but methane, cooling gases, and other non-carbon sources also have to be brought into the focus. And we also need to make sure that we integrate the goals and objectives of other multilateral processes. So if we talked about adaptations, the nature-based solutions, because there's so many co-benefits and synergies. So I think this is an opportunity for us to talk about this, give these messages. And with this, I have great pleasure now to introduce the session, which is about greening India's grids. And we know that India has more than 100 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity. And this is already about 12% of the total power generation installation capacity. And the installation capacity is slated to rise. We have a target of 450 gigawatt with penetration levels going up to almost 30% by 2030 at the national level. But as we go through this, we know there are many challenges as well. Many renewable energy states in India have penetration levels already in the range of 10 to 30% and even higher at different periods of time, and are already facing grid integration challenges. So this session will bring together leading companies, and we can see a lot of strength in this panel already to highlight, and we would request them to highlight the required innovations, the required reforms that will enable the integration of the planned 450 gigawatt renewable energy target into India's power system by 2030s. Companies will share the priority technologies and enablers to ensure safe and reliable operation of India's power grid, and in the presence of increasing share of variable renewable power. With this, I request Surabhi Singhvi of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development in India to please moderate the discussion with the Indian business leaders on policies, technologies, and market reforms required to make this a reality. Over to you, Surabhi.
Thanks a lot, Seema. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to have all of you with us join this discussion on greening India's power grids. Thanks, Seema, for giving that background. And I think all of us know that science has been very clear that climate change has been intensifying and it's rapid. We've been reminded of this by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and various other organizations time and again that it's time to act now. If you actually look at the IPCC's 1.5 degree compliant pathway, it calls for a full decarbonization of power systems. There is actually no route to net zero that goes without having 100% renewable power in the system. And fortunately, technology is on our side. So we know that solar and wind energy both have seen tremendous cost reductions. And as Seema was alluding to, India has been one of the leaders in the world in installation of renewable power capacity. We are at around 12% in power generation, which is a quarter of our installed capacity right now. And we aim to be at more than 50% of our power capacity by 2030. Given that every change comes with a challenge, this change also has a number of challenges attached to it. One of the primary ones being, this is renewable power, which is variable and intermittent, very different from the conventional power that the grids were made up for. When the power becomes intermittent and variable, there is an additional burden on the grid about the safe and reliable operation of the grid. And there's a need to equip the grid properly and adequately to ensure that it can accommodate right now and increasing, but later on a predominant share of renewable power in it. And hence, there is a need to look at what are the technology solutions and what are the market reforms that are needed to ensure that this grid is accommodating that increased renewable power and is yet robust, safe, and reliable. Which is why we have the focus of this session on the subject, which is very pertinent for India right now. There are a number of market interventions that have been made in India on this. There are a number of gigawatt-hour scale storage tenders that have come about recently by government authorities. There are a couple of great markets that have been initiated to ensure that there's power market flexibility. So I'm referring to the Green Day Ahead market and the real-time market, which are now functional in India. There's also a drive towards converting the existing conventional meters into smart meters. All of these efforts are directed at making Indian power grid a robust and green grid. And it's a pleasure for us to have a stellar group of business leaders amongst us to provide insights on what the priority technologies and market reforms are that are required to make this grid green and robust. Let me just quickly introduce the business leaders that we have amongst us to throw some light and insightful insights on the subject. In alphabetical order, we have Mr. Nadir Godrej, Chairman and Managing Director, Godrej Industries. Godrej Industries is a leading business conglomerate in India, present in consumer goods, real estate, agriculture, chemicals, and has operations across 18 countries. We also have with us Mr. Rajiv Ranjan Mishra, who you can see on the boardroom screen, sitting right of Sophie. He's Managing Director, Aprava Energy, formerly known as CLP India. Aprava Energy is a diversified power company jointly owned by the CLP Group and a global investment group called CDPQ. Going forward, this is very interesting and pertinent. Going forward, the company has decided to only invest in low carbon growth areas. We also have with us Mr. Vineet Mittal, Chairperson, Avada Energy. Avada is one of the fastest growing renewable energy companies in India. Mr. Vineet, before heading Avada, he had headed Welspun Energy, which was a leading energy company then and is now acquired by Tata Power. We also have with us Mr. Vishal Mehta, who's Managing Director and Partner, Boston Consulting Group India. He's also the lead energy, climate, and sustainability at the consulting company. This is a global consulting firm with a leading voice in energy space in India. So it's great to have all of you and welcome to the session. Looking forward to hear from all of you on what are the priority areas that India should focus on to ensure that we have a robust and a green grid. Let me just quickly, before I start the panel discussion, just a reminder about an antitrust reminder from our end. Please avoid any discussion in any conversation of competitively sensitive topics such as pricing, costs, bid strategies, future capacity additions or reductions, customers or output decisions. Thanks a lot for your cooperation on this. Let me get started and let me first come to Mr. Vineet Mittal. Mr. Vineet Mittal, you've been in this business for more than a decade now, and you are seeing increase in renewable energy capacity in the grid. How big do you think is this challenge of integrating this increasing share of renewable power? And we are looking at having more than 50% of our installed capacity in the national grid as renewable power. How big do you think is this challenge? And where do you think the solution lies? If you can actually prioritize and tell us about rank top 3 solutions that are needed to face this challenge that we have in front of us, that would be great. Over to you, Mr. Meet.
Namaste, everyone. Thank you, Surbhi. I think the biggest challenge which we are facing is the upheaval in the coming decade. As previous speaker said, that Indian government is intending to increase the capacity to more than 450 gigawatt in renewable alone by 2030. And with increased renewable energy mix in power, it requires a lot of flexibility in the grid, which means it would require more investment in smart metering, a smart grid, forecasting solution, and building balancing reserves for the grid. And the good part is that India's apex electricity regulator has already taken the cognizance of this challenge and has created new markets like real-time market, green day-ahead market. But that does not addresses the scale of problem fully. CRC is also developing market mechanism for scaling up balancing reserve. But what is needed, like some of the federal government schemes are not demanding generators themselves to provide round-the-clock renewable energy by hybridizing the various sources of energy with storage and giving 80 to 85% CUF through renewable energy. So that puts the onus to build the technology and solution on developers. But that's one mechanism. But I think what's more needed is probably scaling up investment into the grid management by doubling it. Because right now, what we are doing as a nation is we are mostly building large solar and wind farms in Gujarat and Rajasthan. And another solution could be potentially building a smaller solar and wind hybrid in almost 9 districts, which has wind capacity. And in entire district of around 700 district, if we start using the day power, using the solar and hybridizing with say, storage and wind wherever it's possible. So that will start providing a district level grid stability as well. So there are multiple solutions which we have been pursuing with the government to address this issue. And the good news is with the One Sun and One World initiative of ISA and Indian government, it also gives the opportunity to follow the sun and bring the global grid and use the power wherever it's needed. And so it can, when it's not needed in India, probably it can be used in some other country. So there are many things which are happening, and the key is to speed up the pedal on all these solutions and build them concurrently, so we don't have a challenge around the grid stability in future.
Perfect. That's very helpful, Mr. Vineet. I think one of the things that you mentioned, which is focusing on building hybrid capacities, so solar and wind together, because we are fortunate enough in India to have locations favorable to have solar and wind together, unlike many other countries. That's one of the solutions that I think India has already started working on, fortunately so. And I think the fact on increasing the transmission grid is something that India is very well placed in terms of, one, we have increasing power demand. So anyway, we are increasing our transmission grid. So we are placed in that situation where we are building new grids, and we can ensure that those grids are future ready to ensure that they can integrate the renewable energy in the times coming ahead. I think a very important change that we've also seen with renewable energy coming in is the role of consumers. The role of consumers has changed very drastically, right? The conventional grids were supposed to just supply power from generation to consumption. Now we have seen increase in distributed generation. We have Mr. Godrej with us, and Godrej Industries themselves have a number of captive power plants, as well as renewable power plants, and as well as access to open access capacity on renewables. And the two-way communication that has started with the grid, that has placed consumers in a very, in a more responsible position, as they also have to contribute towards maintaining stability in the grid, which earlier was not foreseen. So, Mr. Godrej, I'd like to come to you with this on what is it that companies and large consumers like Godrej Industries are planning on to ensure that you contribute towards ensuring that the grid is stable. You also have a number of access to a number of solar and wind energy plants. What is it that you do at your end to ensure that you get access to round the clock renewable power in a stable and safe manner? Over to you, Mr. Godrej.
Thank you. It is no longer climate change within a tolerable range. A crisis is what it's about, with fires, floods, as well as drought. Every week, a constant blast, far worse than seen in the past. If we must, we will adapt. Prevention, though, would be more apt. There is a cost to adaptation. It's rising fast in every nation, as well as for the world at large. This will be a heavy charge. In fact, we should all conclude prevention would be far more shrewd. Indeed, it would cost much less and avoid a lot of stress. GHG emissions should be reduced. Green energy should be produced. With fossil fuels, what we can see is flexibility in a high degree, as ramping up can be quite quick. But when green energy is what we pick, however strenuously we try, we can't control what we supply. We can't commence or interdict. At best, we can try to predict. Solar and wind are both this way, but if we can bring into play as fuels solid biomass or biofuel and biogas, we certainly would then see more flexible green energy. Now, biomass cogeneration makes sense for a continuous operation. In palm oil mills, we use our own, but biomass that's specially grown or byproduct biomass, groundnut shell powder or bagasse, can now be sourced quite easily. A lower cost is what we see. This strategy may not succeed if a backup source is what you need. Even if availed once in a way, you would still have to pay in order to have the right to play a max demand charge every day. This is a change in policy I would dearly like to see. No constant charge every day, but a much higher rate to pay only when you enter the fray. This is a greener way to play. While petrol and diesel are highly taxed, the coal cess is much more relaxed. One would think it would be nice if it tracked a proper carbon price. Now, wind and solar can be fickle. This could lead us into a pickle. The grid could be quite unsteady. Therefore, we should be quite ready with all the solutions we might find. Grid management comes to mind. Time-based pricing must be tried. And if it is properly applied, peak demand would be shaved off and shortages would be staved off. Predictive analytics could be tried and storage solutions must be applied. Batteries are already there, but their cost still high. We fear new technologies are on the way. They could arrive any day. For the rich world, it would be wise if they step up and subsidize. A fair balance would be restored and energy efficiently stored. In time, of course, costs will fall, but they aren't the end all. Pump storage is already there, but hydrogen could be where the future surplus could be stored once technology is on board. There's scope for both green and blue, as long as it's not a dirtier hue. But in order to properly reap the benefits, it should be cheap. Good solutions should be in place, as they could prove to be our ace. Demand and supply could then be matched. The gaping shortage would be patched. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Godrej. I should have been better prepared to ask a better question in a better way. You have, in this fantastic poem that you wrote, there are so many solutions that you've talked about that it's difficult for me to pinpoint and take one over the other. But thanks a lot. This was very, very helpful. And I'm sure all of us loved the poem that Mr. Godrej has written. I think just a few things that I would want to touch upon within the fantastic answer that we got from Mr. Godrej. I think you talked about having storage technologies. Of course, the costs are high. And I think when we are talking about climate change, technology is really on our side. We have technologies that exist to help us in this race against climate change already present. Of course, there are a few challenges that we face. In case of batteries, what Mr. Godrej alluded to was costs being high. And he also talked about a few policy changes that are needed, including a demand charge and as well a TOD pricing. So I think there are a number of solutions that you mentioned. One particular one that I want to pick up, and a few particular actually, but that I want to pick up from your answer are how new technologies can be integrated within the grid to ensure that we can accommodate the higher share of renewable power. And with this as a link, I would just go to Mr. Rajiv now. Mr. Rajiv, you head a power company which has been predominantly in the coal power plants to start with, but you've made this conscious decision of going from coal to renewable, and you've decided to not invest any of your money in the dirty coal from going forward, and you'd only spend on low carbon green sources. Now, my question to you is, Mr. Godrej talked about technologies being present, but not being very cost heavy. And now that Apraava Energy is planning to get into the transmission and distribution segment as well, there is an entire portfolio that you'll be holding within the power system. And where do you think you are going to focus on as a company to ensure that the transition that you are also making from coal to green is actually sustainable, and to ensure that the grid doesn't suffer because of that and people are more comfortable moving away from coal?
Thank you, Surabhi. And this is the worst possible outcome. Speaking after Nadir Godrej is, for me, it's like going from the sublime to the ridiculous. But be that it may, he's already pointed out the various solutions in his outstanding poem. Let me just highlight a few, speaking as a power company, and I hasten to add, not really a renewable generator, or rather not really a generation.
Mr. Mishra, yes. We'll just request you to move the speaker a little closer to you, Mr. Mishra. Thank you.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Or the laptop out of the way. Yeah. Perfect.
Oh, okay. That might be because of the problem. So what I was saying is that many solutions have already been proposed.
We've gone back to it, Mr. Rajiv. If you can just place it, yeah. Yes, we can hear you very well.
It was, yeah, sorry.
Is this all right?
Yes.
Okay. Even the speaker doesn't want me to speak after Mr. Godrej. No matter. I just would like to cover, a few things purely from a power utilities perspective, and I say in particular a systems player, rather than just generation or transmission or distribution. And the solutions I highlight are as follows, and including the ones we are looking at. Look. First and foremost, to pick up from where Sophie mentioned, I think the announcement by the G20 has been useful. What India has done in the last 10 years has been impressive, but it will be nice now to have targets which are consistent with a 1.5 Celsius world. In particular, a plan for transitioning away from coal. I'm sure in due course that will come. I think that will be good for the country. Actually important, because it is actually an emergency rather than just a crisis, as we all know. Secondly, look at where we are as a nation. 25% give or take out of the 400 gigawatts capacity terms from renewables, 12% give or take in energy terms. Later on today, we have a session with Lord Adair Turner. 3 or 4 years back, both he and I were with a company called 50 Hertz in Berlin, which runs the grid for the erstwhile Eastern Germany, part of Germany. And the CEO came in and told us, well, we are about 55% renewables, and I'm not worried. This is energy terms. Once I cross 60%, I really need to start thinking of new solutions. So, technologically, it is not a rocket science. However, we also need to know a few things that India does not have. As a nation, we have not considered a transition fuel. Most of the developed countries which have moved from fossil or thermal to a green grid have accepted the notion of a transition fuel, whether it can be gas or the countries which are which are blessed enough with hydro. Some countries, as we know, China in particular, going very big on nuclear. None of the three are acceptable for various differing reasons to our country. So I think India needs to consider that and have solutions which are consistent with that kind of situation. So what is it that we can do? I think from speaking as industry to the government, firstly, there's no magic bullet, of course. We need to try a variety of solutions. Vineet mentioned wind solar hybrids, as did you. That needs to be tried. That the peaking power bids need to be tried. But I would like to suggest 3 or 4 specific ones. First is the general reforms in the power sector would help renewable energy or greening of the grid as much as anything else. I think Mr. Godrej and Mr. Dalmia and many industrialists, non-power companies who are here would tell you that the notion of companies buying directly renewable energy has often been sabotaged, if I may say so, by some state electricity regulators. And the reason it has been sabotaged is not because they are against green energy, but simply because the economics of the distribution companies does not work. So I think fixing that, which has been a long-term process, is absolutely crucial to greening of our grid. So that's point number 1. The second point I would highlight, and for this I draw on to the conversation with the 50 hertz person, is in our country, in India, I think we are the only country in the world which seems to have transferred the responsibility of the variability coming into the electricity grid onto generators. Whereas, various regulations about forecasting and scheduling, each state interpreting it differently, each state having their own penalty, which keep on changing over a period of time, which bring in uncertainties and impossibility of allocating capital. Whereas the countries, particularly in Europe, and I know Germany in particular, who have successfully progressed a lot more on that, and even Australia, I think, where one of our shareholders has a large business, is we have seen that the challenge of managing the grids, the integration of renewable into the grid, is taken as a systemic problem, not that contracted out to various different energy players. Each generator, even very important and large ones like Avada Energy, will find it very difficult to manage the disruption in the grid as an individual generator. So I think that is something that we need to think about. And finally, and in order not to go on speaking, I would say that demand side interventions, again, Mr. Godrej already pointed out, in some states, including Maharashtra, where I live, for industries, time of the day tariff is a reality. There is absolutely no reason why each consumer should not be subject to the same time of the day tariff. The behavioral changes that will bring in would be immense. I mean, you go to a UK home, any UK home, and I'm sure in Netherlands, but since I recently visited one, there is a meter. You switch on the electric kettle, you can see how many pounds per minute you're spending. Really? Yes, as opposed to, this is no rocket science. Those solutions are very easily available. And it's amazing how you see that influence behaviors about when to turn on heating or not, when to turn on air conditioning or not. Should I use my stove for heating water to make my cup of coffee, or should I use the electric kettle? It is amazing what behavioral changes can be brought in. So these are relatively simple, technologically simple steps that we can immediately bring in, I feel, in our country to help us on our journey towards greening of our grid. I'll just stop here and happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Mishra. That was very powerful, and you pointed out at very specific solutions that would be needed to ensure that we have a robust grid in the presence of renewable power. I think there is a host of solutions that you mentioned and Mr. Godrej mentioned in his remarks. One of the new entrants to this menu of solutions is what our Prime Minister is planning to even announce probably sometime tomorrow or early on during COP, is the concept of one solar, one world and one grid, which is actually connecting the entire world through one grid to ensure that whenever the sun goes down in one part of the country or in one country, the other country which has the sun up and is generating solar power, that power is actually transmitted to the other country. Now, as a concept, it's a fantastic concept, and we hope that a lot of work is done to ensure that this becomes reality. We have Mr. Vishal Mehta with us, who has been who's been in the leading edge on in terms of working on this concept and looking at how this would work. So, Mr. Mehta, coming to you on this, what do you think are going to be the challenges? Of course, the political challenges are something that are known to everyone. But on the technology front and on taking it to practical terms, in real terms, what do you think are the challenges that this concept is likely to face, and how should we be placed to ensure that we are able to mitigate those risks that this concept faces?
Yeah, thanks, Urbi. So, look, I mean, with respect to one sun, one world, one grid, we are discussing this in the context of the COP, and I don't think there can be a better symbolic or showcase project from the perspective of global cooperation to fight the climate challenge, right? So, I think it's a
Sorry, Vishal, can you speak up a bit? Perhaps get closer to the mic. Thanks.
Okay, is this better? Okay, so I was saying, just in the context of the COP, I don't think there can be a better project to showcase global cooperation, as compared to one sun, one world, one grid. I want to make 3 points with respect to what I think would be challenges and which we need to solve to just make this happen. I think technically I don't see it as being challenging. Of course, the project execution itself is challenging, across multiple countries. I think you will need undersea construction, you will need overland. So the usual risks with respect to project execution remain, but technically in terms of, if you ask a power system modeler or an electrical engineer to say, whether you can design that, I don't think that's going to be a big challenge, right? I think the challenge comes in what are the rules of engagement on how different people connect to this grid. And if you think about it in terms of the explosion of the internet happened, when the rules of the game and how do you connect to the grid became very, very clear to different parts of the world, and you had open standards which were developed. I mean, so you need something similar where the rules of the engagement are clear on who brings in capacity, who draws out power, how does the commercial construct of that and the market design of that gets handled. I think that needs to be gotten out of the way very, very quickly, because that moves it from a context, from just a concept to a real, I would say, a business proposal, right? The second point I would like to make is just, I think this is a classical project where you need to apply the principles of climate finance. So if you think about a transmission line which gets constructed in India, you typically get financing for about 15 years or 20 years, where the life of the transmission line is 30, 35 years. If you think about a project like this is a 100-year project, right? And if you think about, amortizing your cash flows over a 100-year period, you will find that the cost of this project is going to look very, very different to people who connect to the grid as compared to if you think about it as a 15, 20-year project, right? It is a demand which has been made by many of the transmission companies, even in India, saying, why don't you have, the transmission bids which come, think of it as a 30, 35-year project rather than a 20, 25-year. It makes a big difference to the ultimate bids which come, right? So I think that would be the second point that I would like to make. The third is just the speed. So, I am just from a power system modeling perspective, there is no one storage technology that can be 100% of market share. So you will have your batteries, you will have your pumped hydro, you will have hydrogen. I mean, grids have always had multiple sources of generation. I mean, India, we have fallen short on hydro, we fell short on gas, we fell short on nuclear, but not because of desire. I mean, it was just that we couldn't execute it. So similarly, you will have different storage technologies which will be there. However, the more we delay this project, the more and more questions will come around saying, there are better alternatives for doing in-country storage. Then why do we need this project, right? Though if I just step back, I think, different types of storage are required in the grid. And this is one of those projects which is there. I personally feel if we don't get to a construction stage within a year and a half time, you will start raising doubts about, there are better alternatives available and should we really be doing this project or not? So those would be my 3 points. I think the market design, second is just the financing. And third is, I think we just need to do this really, really fast, and get going with the construction.
Got it. And just to your point on starting sooner than later, I think a pertinent question is also to ask ourselves is also whether it makes sense to invest in a global grid, or does it just take a step back and see what other technology solutions that exist today? I mean, I would say that rather than waiting for a year and a half and just starting in a hurry, let's just first think about what the options are, what the available technologies are, and where the buck needs to go. To ensure that we do justice to the available technologies and ensure that we have a good grid. So I think what we have here is a problem of plenty. And we're also we have a number of options, and where we get stuck is, okay, we know time of day tariff should be there. We know hydrogen should come in. We know storage should come in. We know batteries are going to play an important role. We know one sun, one world, one grid would also play an important role. But the problem that exists is, how do you prioritize? And I think that's a pertinent question that I would want to come back to all of you just for like a rapid fire question. But before that, we're also very pleased to be joined by Mr. Mahendra Singhi from Dalmia Cement at the venue. He's in Glasgow. And we're very pleased to have you, Mr. Singhi. And could you, Dalmia Cement has been one of those companies which have been 100% renewable powered cement companies. And could you give us a sense of where you see, which of these solutions do you see as suitable for you as a consumer in India to adopt?
Thank you, Surbi. And first, my thanks to all the panelists who have really given their expert advices. In fact, I was just going to ask also, because we are one of the major consumer and also belongs to a possible to abate cement sector. And we have committed for 100% renewable energy by 2030. Now it's a long journey for us, but at the same time, it's a must journey for us. Now, these experts, including Mr. Vishal Mehta, they can advise that how generator and the government can come together, and one, they green the grid, they take care of various charges, and then in what reasonable way the green power can lend to the consumer. I think it's a big dilemma in the Indian scenario, but at the same time, I think the way government is committed for 450 gigawatt, things would change, but can it change fast? But at the same time, I would say a lot of initiatives have been taken by the government, particularly in terms of now to motivate various generators that how they can now come out with the hybrid mode. So we Dalmia Cement, who have already committed for EV100 for converting to electric vehicles, then RE100 by 2030, as well EP100. So, we became the first manufacturing company broadly in the world to commit all three. But then need is, how do we get the action fast? And we are just looking forward that how we can create such examples globally also. So thank you for this opportunity. And we look forward for various positive outcomes in COP26, which will go a long way to creating a climate of hope. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Singhi. We just have around 4 to 5 minutes left for the panel discussion. In that, I would just want to go around the table and get a quick answer, one-liner on one, if you can just name the priority area that you think should be worked upon by the governments. It's going to be a recommendation to the government as well as businesses. And two, we talk about international collaboration and the need for it to ensure that we as a nation move towards ensuring that our growth that's happening is a green growth. So if you can talk about, again, in one line, just where do you see the international collaboration helping you, whether it's finance, whether it's technology, whether it's R&D, or which of the areas do you think international collaboration should be there to help and support this grid and RE integration? First to Mr. Vineet Mittal, just going in the same order that we went until now.
So in terms of partnership, developed nations should provide cheapest possible financing to the RE companies in India. And if I have to recommend government for the policy change, privatize DISCOM.
Very helpful. Thanks, Mr. Vineet. Mr. Godrej, over to you.
Nadir, you are muted.
For international cooperation, I would say technology. And for the government, I think emphasis on biomass could be a very good solution, because biomass doesn't have the time-based constraints of solar or wind. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Godrej. Mr. Rajiv Mishra.
Oh, actually, my number one priority has already been mentioned by Vineet, but I would just say, financial restructuring of the distribution companies. Without that, we can't really progress. So that's which I guess Vineet mentioned another way of achieving the same thing. I think, speaking as an Indian, as opposed to just a power company guy, I have to say that the one area in which the Paris Agreement has not really moved is the financing for the vulnerable nations. It was meant to be by last year $100 billion a year, and nothing much has been seen. So that must be the key area, because a lot of these solutions are going to cost money, and many of the vulnerable countries like India are not necessarily best placed to spend that.
Sure, thanks. And you're right, financing is very much needed. Probably $100 billion is also nothing. We need trillions of dollars. And I think there's also a need to emphasize on innovative financing mechanisms that should happen to ensure that we reach that goal. Moving forward, Mr. Vishal Mehta, over to you.
Yeah, I think I just want to elevate the financing point one level and say that, look, our power system was designed from a scarcity perspective. The design was to ensure that there is power access to everyone. The need and the paradigm there has changed. From now we are basically in a surplus situation from a capacity point of view, and we need innovation. You have to rethink the entire design. The role of the DISCOM, the role of the generator, the role of the investor. I think that needs a complete.
Okay, thanks a lot. And I'm aware that Mr. Rajiv and Mr. Singhi have to get on to another session. That's end of the panel discussion. Thanks a lot, all of you, for being there and contributing and giving these insights. I hand over back to Joe. Joe, over to you.
Thank you very much, Surbi, and all the panelists. We heard at the start from Sophie Punt at Women Business about the critical challenge that's faced at this COP, the urgent need to put in place the policies and finance to keep global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees. And we also heard from Seema Arora of CII about the importance at this COP also to keep in mind achievement on the short-term targets that will get the world to its long-term targets. And I think that this discussion that we've just had has, with this panel, has traversed, these scales from the practical requirements to incorporate more renewable energy into India's grid now, a critical geography in the global effort to extend access to safe energy whilst limiting global warming, as well as covering some of the visionary aspects of creating a single grid powered by renewable energy for the world to draw down power as it needs as the earth spins and following the sun. So I really appreciate Surbi and the panelists, the clarity and the specificity and the vision that you all shared. I'm going to take a risk, and I popped this down as you spoke, Mr. Godrej, and as an immediate response, maybe it's better than it seems now, some 30 minutes later. But what I was just going to say is that, let me find it. Where are we? Maybe I've memorized it. So Mr. Godrej's grid solutions list is very comprehensive and should not be missed, but it's difficult to rhyme after Nadir because he's a sustainability poet without peer. And we'll just leave it there. Mr. Vishal Mehta, thank you very much. Mr. Rajiv Ranjan Mishra, thank you very much. Mr. Vineet Mittal, Thank you very much. Surbi, thank you too. Could you just in 30 seconds or so tell me about the work that you're doing with businesses in India on the energy transition?
Sure, thanks a lot, Joe. We at WBCSD, we really acknowledge the fact that this is a pertinent question that India faces about integrating renewable energy. And what we have in place is a work stream and a working group on energy storage, where we've brought together companies from all over the renewable energy and energy storage value chain to talk about challenges that these companies are facing in adoption of energy storage solutions. And this also includes a number of transmission and distribution utilities as well. I'm conscious of time, and I know Claire has her closing remarks, Joe, so I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And so if you're interested in that work, please get in touch with Surbi or I. So Claire O'Neill is the Managing Director for Climate, Energy and Natural Climate Solutions at WBCSD. She had a career in politics for some 13 years, including being a UK Member of Parliament and the Climate Change Minister. She led the bid for this COP to take place in the UK and was the inaugural president designate until she left politics in 2020 to join the WBCSD. So it's a fantastic moment for you, Claire, to see this happening now, but obviously all the work lies ahead now in these next 14 days. Claire, it's my pleasure to ask you to say a few remarks at the end of this session.
Thank you, Joe. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation, and first of all, I'm so sorry. It's all my fault that you're all having to go to Glasgow. Huge apologies for that. But the city is ready and waiting, and I'm already here, so I know we'll have a good time and we'll meet in person. But secondly, I wanted to congratulate the Confederation of Indian Industry and the panel and We Mean Business on putting this question of grids so firmly into the opening days. I was also Energy Minister, Joe, in the UK government, and what tends to happen is we talk a lot about changes in production. That's where the renewable conversation happens. We talk a lot about the changes in demand, particularly the increase in overall demand in electrification. And we often don't find it very interesting to talk about the pipes and wires in the middle. And it's really important that whenever we're having this conversation about long-term decarbonisation of energy and the changes in demand and the need for just transition, we speak very firmly about the green grid that we want to see. At the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, we've taken a slightly different approach this year. We'll be publishing our manifesto for climate recovery on Wednesday of this week, 12 action priorities that we see for public-private cooperation to really drive climate recovery. And number 3 on this list is global green grids. And I think, you know, a couple of, and it is, as you say, Surbi, going to be very insightful to see the launch of the India and UK Green Grids Initiative. And I think that will encapsulate so many of the challenges, but essentially, you know, we are going to have to deal with overall decarbonisation of energy, which we know is intrinsically linked to economic growth, a huge amount of investment that wants to go into the transition, phasing out the most polluting fossil fuels and phasing in renewables with all the intermittency challenges, working on demand side technologies that need to happen, working on storage that we know is very much out of the money. And I think crucially, and I believe one of the panelists said this, might have been Mr. Mehta, there is no one size fits all energy solution for every economy. I think one of the slightly nerve-wracking conversations that we increasingly have at COP and elsewhere is that somehow the pathway that has led to the decarbonisation of the Northern European energy system is 100% applicable to economies like India. And I fervently believe that not to be true. And I think we need to be careful about trying to dictate these particular pathways to countries that will have a very different development pathway, very different challenges, and very many other opportunities that can really be embraced. But I think it was also said, you know, this is not just a domestic conversation, that the sun rising everywhere, one global grid, to paraphrase Mr. Modi, is a wonderful concept, but to deliver that will require new long-distance transmission systems, shared infrastructure, cross-border trading arrangements, a beefing up of regulatory organizations that in many cases do not have a long historic track record of really strong policy making, and a lot of cooperation between governments, companies, and investors. And I think one of the things that has also struck us is how important this is to be a policy conversation, certainly the importance of grid planning and cooperation, but also how much the private sector needs to be involved to ensure that technical knowledge is shared and that solutions really meet market demands. So I think this is very much a crucial topic. Again, I commend the panel and the organisers for putting this firmly onto the agenda. It is too often neglected, and I think this public-private cooperation is going to be the way forward if we are to truly invest in grids that can give us this low-carbon energy future that we all desire. But thanks, Joe, and back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone. We're back in 30 minutes for the launch of an EV, electric vehicle ambition for India by Indian businesses. So we'll see you in 30 minutes for that session. Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.